Family members of hostages being held by Hamas terrorists are marching on Downing Street this afternoon. Jewish community leaders and anti-Semitism campaigners are joining thousands for the national march for the hostages through central London. Protesters are, of course, urging Sir Keir Starmer to prioritise releasing of the remaining hostages before any recognition of a Palestinian state. Well, I'm now joined by writer and commentator Jonathan Sacerdoti. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining me. Of course, a very important protest today because we obviously see a lot of the pro-Palestinian marches, and I suspect there'll be perhaps some political spin today saying that this is actually a march to continue the war. But this is a march about releasing those hostages, isn't that right?
Indeed, it's not a march to continue the war. They've made it very clear, the people that are marching, that this is about a humanitarian issue. We can't really forget, whatever one thinks of the war going on now in Gaza, that this all started on October the 7th, 2023, when Palestinian terrorists stormed into Israel and very brutally killed, raped, burnt, and kidnapped people from Israel. Now, some of those people are still held as prisoners nearly 2 full years later in the Gaza Strip. And we saw in those videos that they released not that long ago just how horrifically they are being kept, the terrible conditions they're in. So it's no surprise that there are thousands of people marching in the UK who simply want to see the British government do everything it can in order to bring those hostages back home. And I believe that the messages that they're putting out on that protest are that it's not appropriate for Britain to recognise a Palestinian state without making it at least conditional on the instant release of the hostages with no preconditions. It seems to me that whatever one thinks of the politics of the region or what's going on there, the idea of civilians being kept hostage in the Gaza Strip, especially in those horrible conditions for so long, is simply a humanitarian issue, and that there is no question that those hostages ought to at least have food, water, medicines, but also to be released immediately. So I do think that that's what those people are protesting for, and that's why they've managed to draw people from all quarters of society, from both the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world, in order to show that that really is the primary aim. It should be the priority here for the British government as well.
Yes, Britain, of course, today has been condemning Israel's decision to expand military operations into Gaza. I believe the Vice President J.D. Vance condemned many of the at least attempts to recognise Palestine before the next General Assembly, I think accusing France, the UK and potentially Canada of emboldening Hamas. What do you make of those comments, Jonathan?
Well, of course, it does embolden Hamas, and I think it's fairly well accepted now, after Hamas thanked the UK and other countries for that as well. It's fairly well accepted that that has prolonged the war. It's stopped the negotiations for a ceasefire. It has scuppered those negotiations, and as a result, it's kept those hostages in captivity for longer, because around the 21st of July, when David Lammy led that letter from 25 different states saying that they believed there should be an instant ceasefire, no conditions, all sorts of other things that were wanted, a flood of aid into the Gaza Strip. Nothing wrong per se with any of those aims, but because they put their names to those aims without any conditions, what happened was the negotiations that had been going on under the auspices of the US and Qatar and Egypt really stalled. Hamas was believed to be about to agree to a ceasefire, which would have seen the release of some of the live hostages, and instead they realized that international opinion, at least some of it, was going their way without any kind of concessions. So they hardened their position. And that has meant, as the Americans have pointed out, that this has simply given Hamas really a second wind. They feel they just need to drag this on. And Britain's position under Keir Starmer has been that unless there is a ceasefire by September, by that UN meeting, then Britain will recognize a Palestinian state. So from the Hamas perspective, they don't care about their own civilians. They don't care about shortage in Gaza. They don't care about continuing the war. In fact, they are now incentivized to keep going so that there won't be a ceasefire. The biggest obstacle to a ceasefire is therefore Hamas, and they will be rewarded come September if there is no ceasefire by Britain's recognition of this state. So when J.D. Vance said next to David Lammy in that press conference that it was something that America wouldn't do, recognizing a supposed Palestinian state, he said it's because there is no state to recognize. There are no accepted borders. We know that those people do not qualify for statehood on almost any measure that we might expect in usual customary international law. And yet countries like the UK under Keir Starmer and David Lammy are planning to recognise it anyway as a sort of punishment to Israel, a democratic ally of Great Britain, and they are planning to do it as a result. There's a straight line between October the 7th and the recognition. As a result of that, the most horrific, brutal, barbaric attack on Israel by the Palestinian Arabs, it seems all upside down, and it seems very much to send a very wrong signal to jihadist terrorists all around the globe, not just those in Gaza Strip.
Yeah, Jonathan, as well. You know, this is a very busy day for this developing war. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has said he wants to finish the job and defeat Hamas. I guess the question I have is it ever possible to defeat Hamas? Because look, they are just basically disgruntled young men who are very upset with what's been going on, and will, whatever happens, provided there's Gazans living in the Gaza Strip, Hamas will just rebirth itself. So is this just a never? Is Benjamin Netanyahu right, is what I'm asking, to say, I'm going to persist until we have full control of the Gaza Strip, because this is the only real solution that there is?
Well, it depends what you mean by the defeat of Hamas. So obviously, there is likely to be a continuing jihadist, Islamic fundamentalist representation of so-called Palestinian nationalism into the future. However, Hamas is not just a bunch of disgruntled jihadis. Hamas is effectively an almost military force that has spent 20 years in the Gaza Strip since the Israeli full withdrawal from that territory, building itself up with Iranian funding, with weaponry. They really, when they invaded on October the 7th, did so like a trained army. Indeed, many of them had apparently trained in Iran and elsewhere. So it is possible to defeat the military might of that terror army, which also has embedded itself in the society in the Gaza Strip. It has also built facilities under schools, mosques, hospitals, in tunnels, under people's homes. All of that can be diminished enormously, and has been, by the Israelis who've been fighting for 2 years there. So I do think that it is absolutely valid that Israel is aiming to destroy that, so that that will pose less of a threat in the future. But
Jonathan, just while we're talking, I just want the audience to understand the footage they're looking at here is, of course, from the march today in London to release the hostages. Please proceed, continue.
Yeah, sorry, that is Ephraim Mervis, the chief rabbi, speaking outside Downing Street now. So not connected to what I'm saying about Hamas by any stretch of the imagination. But Hamas is a force which will continue to try to fight in that way, violently and brutally, against Israelis. It has a declared aim to wipe out Jewish people, in fact, and to kill Jewish people, for there to be no Jewish state of Israel. So I think it's very foolish if people try to frame this in terms of that being an undefeatable force. Nazism was defeated. Imperial Japan was defeated. It is possible to defeat very mighty and horrific barbaric forces which are doing the works of evil that we now see Hamas doing. However, you are correct to focus on the idea that even with the defeat of Hamas, it is likely that the Palestinian cause will continue to be maximalist and will continue to reject any kind of two-state solution which could be acceptable to Israel. That is to say, one where Jews get to live in a Jewish state of Israel at peace, where they're not constantly attacked by acts of terrorism or rockets, or similarly by acts in international fora like the UN or the International Criminal Court or the ICJ, trying to attack Israel and to destroy it. If there are to be two states, then they need to be two states which allow each other to exist. And there's no indication of any mainstream Palestinian political movement which really wants to accept a Jewish state of Israel.
Yes, writer and commentator Jonathan Sacerdoti there. Thank you very much. I tend to be a realist, and I tend to agree that I don't think a two-state solution will ever work. I genuinely do believe that no matter, unfortunately, how sad that may be, I think, unfortunately, that is the reality we live in.